Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to your very favorite Bronze Age Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I am your co-host, Mike-EL, and as always, I'm joined by
Joshua Murr-VELL, and today we're going to be looking at Spidey comics from August of 1983.
That's right, and we are back on track with the regular monthly Spider-Man comics. We're going to start off this week with Amazing Spider-Man, but before we do that, I'd like to introduce our very special guest, one of the biggest comic book fans in Windsor, Ontario, Kevin Morris.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Kevin, just for the record, just so everyone knows, give us a rough estimate of how many comic books you own.
I own 10 comic books now. No, I'm just kidding.
Excellent.
Thousands.
Thousands. All right. But you don't want anyone to break into your house. You're not going to tell us where you live. We understand. That's fine. We're going to talk about Amazing Spider-Man first. Now, Kev, I know that you're a huge Spidey fan. Just for the record, tell us, what was your first issue of Spider-Man?
It was Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man 129 that I purchased. That was my first one. And then I got into Amazing Spider-Man and Web of Spider-Man. And it just went Spider-Man crazy.
You know what's funny is even though you're older than me, you got into Spidey after me because I started a little bit before.
Yeah,
that.
I didn't get into early the comics. Like I was in the G.I. Joe comics first in the mid-'80s,
Okay.
like 86, 87. I think it was around summer of 87, I remember I got into Spider-Man comics. So that's when I think it was right before the wedding, or it proposes to Mary Jane. So like
Excellent.
289, 290.
Wow, these are good times. Okay, so we're not quite at that point yet. We're still a little bit earlier in Spidey's history. But this is arguably the peak, or one of the peaks of the 80s. This is Roger Stern and John Romita Jr., who listeners of our show are all very familiar with. We've been talking about him for 47 weeks in a row now. And, okay, so basically in this issue, this is the big return of Mary Jane Watson. And we talked about this last time. And we're going to pick it up from here. So Peter Parker is making out with, who is this again? Amy Powell?
Amy
Josh?
Powell, yeah, that's Bannon's girlfriend.
Right, okay. So he's in the middle of making out with Amy Powell. Mary Jane comes in. She's been gone for several years in the comic book. And we get a classic soap opera scene of, jealousy and accusations and jokes. And basically, now, Mary Jane and Peter are not a couple. And so she's not visibly upset about it. She's kind of just more joking around about it. But what we end up clarifying is that Amy was really just doing this to make Lance Bannon jealous. Lance Bannon is Peter Parker's rival at the Daily Bugle. And so Peter kind of explains what's going on to Mary Jane. She takes off, and I love this scene because Mary Jane had actually brought like food for like a picnic, and just as she's leaving, he's like, oh, well, at least I don't have to worry about what to do for dinner. And he grabs a chicken leg out and starts munching away on it. I love that. Then we get some classic Spidey action, setting up, putting on his costume, putting on his web shooters, and then going out. And then we get another classic scene. I love seeing this, where we get Spidey chatting with Dr. Kurt Connors, who's a professor at Empire State University. And he touches base with him because he wants to analyze... What is this again?
This is a piece of the robot that he had recently fought, I believe, in the previous issue.
And I love, let's clarify, Spidey does not have a Fortress of Solitude or a Batcave, so he cannot do this himself. He's got to bring it to someone else, a friend, right? I love the fact that he's kind of he's a more realistic, grounded superhero. He's more low rent. He doesn't have the resources, so he has to get friends. So then he goes in and he sees, who is this, the dean?
Yeah, the head of the science department.
Right.
The guy that's been kind of like talking to Peter about how he's failing and his marks aren't, doing so great. So.
Right. Who Peter Parker is familiar with, but Spider-Man has only officially met once. So it's just kind of cool. So he sneaks in a little peek at his grade. He's all happy. So he takes off. We get a classic scene of Peter Parker's happy now because he did good on his exam. So now he starts swinging around the city. And then it's a superhero comic, so we have to have some fisticuffs. And so we cut over to these sort of terrorists that have taken over this church. Spidey intervenes and saves the day. Sorry, I just had a fly. Oh yeah, for those that don't know, we're actually outside. That's why you hear birds chirping. And so I just had a fly in my hand. But anyway, So then we cut back to the Daily Bugle, some scenes with Ben Urich. And then, of course, he visits Black Cat, which I think Black Cat's now been in the hospital for 3 years, by my estimate. But it's been a long time. They're dragging the subplot out as long as possible, but that's okay. So he touches base with her, and then we get some more Spidey swinging action. We touch base with, what's his name? Roger Hochberg, who's been a supporting character for a couple years now. And then basically, this is a weird issue because at this point in the story, I felt like we were kind of just really getting into it. And in this issue, he'd kind of already previously decided that he was going to quit school. But then at the last minute, he gets this notice that he's been accepted to kind of further his studies. And then we have this little narration. There comes times in all of our lives when we must consider our options and make decisions, hard decisions. And once those decisions are made, for good or bad, we must live with them all the days of our lives. And then we see a very rare thing in comics at this time. We see the title of the comic at the end of the book, and we see the credits, story by Roger Stern, art by John Romita Jr. and Dave Simons, and then that's the end of the issue. So this is a fairly serious issue, and the big plot twist is that Peter, for the first time since whenever he started college, which was years ago, he's actually dropping out now. So this is like a big deal. And that is the end of it. And the only thing I can say is that the ending came at a weird time, and it definitely didn't feel like it was the end of the issue. But other than that, I thought this was a really good issue. And because this is Kevin's first episode, Kev, I'd like you to give your brief review of this comic and what you thought of it.
Overall, I did like it. I think there was a lot in this comic I found, and going back to and reading it, and I mean, obviously, with Marvel Comics, and there was always kind of a continuation in the stories or larger plot lines. But I think the one thing I did like, and they were always very good at that in the older issues, is kind of bringing people in the reader that maybe he's just grabbing this issue off the newsstand up to speed on who's who. You see him explain things to Mary Jane. He explains kind of subtly, this is Mary Jane, who I was slightly engaged, engaged to. So I brought up that thing in terms of who these people are, and to get that backstory. And there seems to be there's a lot of things going on in his just in general life, as you were summarizing, but also got a little bit of action in there, and then that hard choice of, do I stay in school or not stay in school for Black Cat. So I think there's definitely a lot in there in that story, and overall I enjoyed it. As usual, I enjoyed the artwork, the panels, the flow of them. There's a lot of great shots, and the nice thing was, it's been a while trying to recognize who the artist is and who's writing it, and then at the end to see the credits. And there were two of my favorites back in the day. So to see Roger Stern, and I love this run of the Spider-Man comics. Although I started a little bit later, I went back, and my goal was get every issue from 200 up. So I always enjoyed this whole run of Spider-Man and Peter Parker and all the things he was dealing with at the time. So overall, I enjoyed it. But it could be a little too much for some people. It was bouncing around a little bit. Right. But for me, I think it was trying to bring up to speed on a lot of different things, and to do that in one issue, I thought was kind of it was pretty impressive.
All right, G.I. Jolie, it's been a while since you've been on the show. You're kind of coming in the middle of a story, but what did you think of this issue?
I think that cat, small child, in the background of wherever you are, is like a mirror into my soul. I saw the cover, and it was like options. Who names? Oh, options. Mary Jane, this blonde woman who is definitely not Deb. Like, do you know what? I didn't hate it.
Mm-hmm.
As much as it's in the middle of what's going on, it wasn't hard to kind of get caught up. Like, Peter's still a philanderer. He's still kind of like this obnoxious student. The last that I left him at, he wasn't a student. I don't remember him being in university yet. So yeah, apparently 3 months has gone by. I was actually surprised to see that Black Cat was still in the hospital. That's kind of weird.
Well, yeah.
Like that's happened. Like, I took a pretty long hiatus, and that woman is still in the hospital. Is that some
Yeah.
kind of joke?
Well, I mean, on one hand, you gotta consider it's not real time; it's comic book time. But on the other hand, to see someone in the same situation for like 17 issues in a row is a little ridiculous. It's tedious for the reader, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, the way that I've been reading the books, it doesn't seem like a lot of time has passed because I'm reading them pretty rapidly. I don't have to wait. This was a monthly comic, so I don't have to I don't have to wait month to find out. So it hasn't really technically been years, but I mean, they should have written her out of that hospital a long ass time ago. But anyway, I don't know. There's just a lot of characters I didn't really care much for, like this other woman and his photography rival, like at his place of employment, like, ooh, freelancer drama. Like, okay, how does that guy get better? There's no way that guy gets better pictures than Spider-Man. Like, that's impossible. Anyway, so it's like that was kind of a write-off. And other than that, like, the drama, like the underlying action and then where it kind of took him kind of went nowhere. Like, he just is web slinging around town because he likes the breeze in his hair, and he happens upon like this organization who's clearly not American from and he saves like this whole congregation of people from being held captive, but like no one knows why they're being held hostage, so that's kind of strange. Like,
it's kind of just thrown in there to have some action.
It was like watching like 3 back-to-back episodes of a soap opera. And like, you know how you kind of get like a bit of a headache when you've been watching too much TV? That's what I felt like. It was like, okay, time to put this down. But I mean, the art is spectacular. Spider-Man.
Yes. Well, yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But Josh, we obviously talk about Amazing Spider-Man almost every episode. But what's your take on this particular issue?
So, surprisingly, I really didn't like this issue. I normally really love Amazing, but for some reason, I think it's just because we've been reading Amazing for so long, and they've been dragging their feet on all of these stories. But this just, like, it felt like nothing new has happened in this issue. It almost felt like a catch-up for anybody who hasn't read Amazing yet. To kind of be like, look, this is what Spider-Man's all about, and like nothing really happens. Even like the climactic conclusion of like MJ walking in on him kissing another woman. Nothing really bad happened from it. Like, yeah, it's kind of embarrassing, but she's just kind of like, yeah, no problem. I came back to drop off the key, and she left. Like, it's just, I don't know. Nothing really, you know, that drama that was a cliffhanger from last issue, it didn't really cause that much grief or cause any drama. And then later on, we see him stop these terrorists who are like holding up a church, and he just takes them down, no problem. It doesn't really have anything that ties into the story. And then he's swinging through the city, and he goes to see Black Cat again as she's in the hospital. I think every single issue this month, she's in the hospital, and he goes and visits her, and it's the same thing. Like, nothing happens when he goes to visit her. It's just to show the readers, again, she's in the hospital. Like, yeah, we know. We know that she's in the hospital. She's been in the hospital for so long. Like, every time she gets better, Doc Ock comes and pulls her cords, and she's got to go back in ICU. And then she's better, and then he comes and pulls the cords, and she's back in ICU. Like, it's just, I feel like maybe they just didn't know what they wanted to do yet, so they were stalling, or I don't know. It just, I don't know. This issue for me really dragged. And then even the art, surprisingly, I love John Romita Jr., but there were parts in this issue where some of the faces looked so off. And
yes, and I noticed
really
that,
felt
but
like out of place.
But did you see who inked it?
No, I didn't.
Dave Simons, who we've never heard of before.
Interesting.
Because I noticed the art, it was a step down from usual for sure.
Yeah, like in particular on original page 17, it's when he's talking to Black Cat. there's an image of MJ behind Black Cat, and MJ looks awful. Like, she looks...
Original page
Original page 17.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah, I see it.
She calls him Tiger, and it evokes memories.
But that image of MJ behind her looks really rough. Like, it's...
Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
It's not good. And then even earlier on, there's like a couple of shots, like the previous page, that first panel with Peter, that doesn't look like Peter. Like,
it's rough.
Yeah, it's really rough. I don't know. I think that, as usual, the storytelling and the layout of the panels is fantastic.
Right.
I think any time that Peter's got the costume on, it looks great. So for the most part, it's really good. But for some reason, there were just moments where the faces really stood out as being not so good. So I don't know. Yeah, all in all, I really didn't enjoy this one.
Well,
and
I also... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's surprising because I normally really love Amazing.
I also want to give a quick memo to modern-day Spidey fans that think that Mary Jane calls people Tiger or Peter Tiger. No. Everybody called everyone Tiger in the 1960s when that original first appearance of Mary Jane was written, because Stan Lee was trying to write like hip teenagers in the 1960s, and she called everybody Tiger. And so I just think it's funny that whenever they have Mary Jane, they're like, oh yeah, make sure she calls Peter Tiger. Even though if you go back to those stories, she probably called everybody Tiger. And if we ever get around to reviewing those 60s issues, we're going to prove that. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, I didn't realize that was a thing.
Like, yeah, and her very first line to Peter, she says, "Face it, Tiger, you've just hit the jackpot." Right, Kev?
Yeah, there was a lot of... Yeah, Stan Lee definitely was trying to stick in with the cool, groovy lingo from the 60s.
And so I think even in the movies, Mary Jane always calls Peter Tiger. But it's like, no, it's just because in that time, Stan Lee was trying to imitate teen slang miserably.
But I think they continued it on, though. It's just something that they had a connection between each other and Mary Jane is really what happened.
Yeah,
You're right. It wasn't intended for that.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's kind of become like that staple for MJ, and it's become MJ's thing. Where maybe before it was just kind of to be hip, but I think the writers kind of took that and ran with it because it's definitely something that's recognizable for that character.
Right. Okay, so to wrap up this issue, I will just say not the strongest issue of Amazing, but because it's actually one of the first issues I owned, because when I was going back and digging through back issue boxes, this is one of the first ones I owned, and I have fond memories of it. I will recommend it because as a 13 or 14-year-old, it definitely was fine for me then. So I think it's a decent issue of Amazing, but not great. So I would recommend it. Kevin, would you recommend it?
Yeah, I'd still recommend it. But yeah, it's. I think there's some things in it that weren't super exciting. But overall, I enjoyed it.
Sweet. G.I. Jolie, what do you think?
Pass. Like, just skip it. I mean, the cover is fun. But if you're gonna read it, read like an original, because this recoloring is bull. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's flat.
Yep, it's not good. It makes it easier to read, sure, but like it's bad.
Right. They need to figure that out because they haven't figured it out yet. Joshua Murr-VELL, do you recommend this issue?
No, I don't think I would, and I think it's just because nothing really happens in this issue, and I'm positive next issue they're going to recap and retell the story of him quitting school, dropping out of school. So, like, I think that you can completely skip this one and have no consequences. And it wasn't offensive enough where I hated it, but I just like, I don't think it was good enough to recommend.
You're like a little bothered though.
I think the reason why I'm bothered though is because I'm reading these stories so close together, and nothing like there's not like they keep repeating stories. Where if I was, I don't know, maybe if it was spread out monthly, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But I feel like it's just because I'm reading them in such a condensed amount of time, and Black Cat, nothing is happening. Peter, nothing is happening. These stories where like he's got these like love problems, they don't really end up having any consequences.
No.
Or any like big problems.
Can you imagine waiting 4 weeks as a kid? Because obviously time moves slower when you're a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine reading this as a kid and then waiting 4 weeks? Like, would it feel better or worse, the fact that you waited 4 weeks?
That's true. It might be worse. I have no idea. It might be.
Oh, just for the listener. Go ahead, Jolie.
If I waited 4 weeks and this was the issue I got, knowing that half of this stuff already happened before, and then next month half of this stuff is going to happen again, then I would be as bothered as Josh.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I would just like go and watch TV or something. Whatever.
Just for the record, for the listeners at home, there's a Garfield cat around my neighborhood, and it just walked by in the alley. But anyway,
It's very cute.
no one can see the Garfield cat. But anyway, okay. So now
Post
we
a
are
photo.
going to move on to the next issue. And I would love to have Kev-N help us summarize these issues, but I realize Kev-N does not have them in front of him because I have my laptop and you don't have anything. So we're going to do the usual. We're going to get Joshua Murr-VELL. I know you love Marvel Team Up, Josh.
Yeah. Okay. So we start this issue with Mr. Fantastic. He's fiddling around in the Baxter building. The Thing and a Human Torch are out on a date, and Sue has taken their son to go see relatives out of town. So Reed's got the place to himself, and then who walks in but Reed's psychotic nephew, I believe is the way that he describes him.
Yes.
He's like broken out of an insane asylum, and this guy, their nephew is this supervillain called the Everyman,
Right.
and he wears this terrifying plain mask because he wants to be like, he wants any person to relate to him. Anyways, he all of a sudden has these like strength powers, and he's fighting Mr. Fantastic, and he blasts him with this ray, and it takes away his like super intelligence. So then we cut to Spider-Man. He's swinging across New York. He wants to go talk to Reed Richards, and when he goes, he sees Reed laying on the ground, and the two of them team up to stop Everyman. Everyman kind of goes in front of a mob, and he starts inciting these people to kind of join him, and he fights the police, and then he starts shooting civilians. Then I don't know. It's just they stop him. They punch him out, and they make him realize that he's causing more harm, and he's not the Everyman because he's harming the Everyman, and he runs off. Reed figures out how to take his intelligence back at the end of the day by this Deus Ex Machina machine, and that's it. That's Marvel Team Up this week.
Yeah.
You're not angry at all.
Yeah.
Okay. So, G.I. Jolie, it's been a few weeks since you've been with us. What did you think of this month's issue of Marvel Team Up?
Mike, we can't hear you really well, eh?
Yeah,
Again?
you're muted.
Oh,
But I heard you.
okay.
Yeah.
I heard you, yeah. Okay, so I took a lengthy, wonderful break from Marvel Team Up and then got to read this classic.
Welcome back.
Oh, good to be here. Do you know what? I didn't hate this. It was it was so ridiculous and stupid that I kind of liked it a little bit. Like, oh, it's so bad. But in a way, there's just something like nutty and nonsensical that I was like, okay, this works. Something about all of this terribleness kind of works a little bit. Like Larry, whose nephew is named Larry. Also, Josh didn't mention, but it's called the Absorbiscan. That's the gun.
Very dangerous.
Oh yes, that he's been. That's the gun that he's been given to somebody whose identity remains a mystery to us. Maybe not to you, but like he's been given it by somebody. I thought for a while I was like, oh, he was like, I got it from the doctor. I was like, oh, does he mean Reed? Did he steal that from Reed's lab? Like, nice family. Like, but no, he got it from some guy who I'm assuming we'll find out like in 3 or 4 issues, so a month, who that is. But let's see. He's just so backwards. The moment he put that stupid mask on, I was living. He's like, it has no features because I want everyone to identify with me. I was like, oh, okay. So you've no eyebrows. It's peach toned. You look terrifying. Like, everything about this guy and what he thinks is just, like, really ill thought out. Like, it's like he didn't, I don't know, he broke out of an insane asylum. Cool. He obviously didn't spend all that time thinking about what he is doing. I don't know. But I loved it. It was stupid. The team up wasn't obnoxious. Do you know what? I think that's why I'm here for this book. Because I liked the team up. I think Mr. Fantastic really works well on his own.
Well, yeah, let me just say... Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, I think what I liked about it is because his strength is always his smarts. Like, his superpower is, like, the elasticity to be able to stretch, but, like, really it is his intelligence that always gets him out of trouble at the end of the day. So taking that away is really fun. I don't know if they really did it super great, but, like, it worked.
Yeah, like, he was really tortured when he realized he was kind of, like, normal. He's like, oh, God, I'm so expendable.
Right, and I think...
adequate.
Right, and I think it kind of plays off of Reed's ego pretty well. Like, I think that maybe they were... I don't know what they were trying to do, but... knowing Reed and like how big of an ego he has and how he can be kind of like cocky and rude sometimes, it was kind of nice to see that and like seeing the fact that was taken away from him and he's kind of going a little bit insane from it.
Well, okay, let's. I just want to hear from Kev-N, because Kev, you have read many Marvel team-ups, I think. In fact, you've probably read all the Marvel team-ups,
You know, right? I've read a few here and there. That's probably the one issue. I still haven't finished all of them, and this was one I hadn't read yet.
Really?
Yeah, I had it there, and it was funny. It was great that you selected, because I was like, oh, right, I haven't read this one yet. What are they, 60 cents back then?
Yep.
Yeah, I would advise on this issue probably not to spend the 60 cents. This is of all the three... I just did not care for. Part of it is, I'm a little confused when we were talking about, Mr. Fantastic, Reed Richards with his intelligence, because it was saying it sapped the power from him, or is it just his intelligence it sapped? I was trying to understand, because he was always intelligent. He built a rocket ship to go get the cosmic ray. Like, he was always brilliant. Right. I was kind of like, what's it taking away from him, and then what is it taking away from others? And I think the problem with this issue was, you have a viewership that usually back in the day, 8 to 12-year-olds. That's, you had the older too, but that's who they try to. But I think there's like a political message in this, obviously. And trying to put a political message in a venture action comic like Spider-Man and towards children, I think it kind of backfired the way they did it. I don't know what it was. It just it kind of. They were forcing it into, to me, the action of the story to some degree. It just felt like it just didn't flow. It kind of jumped right in. His nephew comes in, and all of a sudden, all this, everything happens to Reed Richards, and he runs out, and now he's doing a political speech on the steps, of downtown there, and Spider-Man's trying to help Reed Richards, with this. And I thought it was interesting because for me, Reed Richards has always been more of a calm, wise. He seemed, obviously, yes, he was having a difficult time and kind of emotional over not having the intelligence so far and frustrated, which was interesting, but I didn't know if it's really in character to him. It just felt, it just didn't feel right. And I feel like and a lot of the Marvel team-ups were like that. They were kind of, I find they're put in there quick. It's to get guest stars together and try to put a story around and sell the comic based on it's Spider-Man plus, another popular Marvel character. But yeah, I could not get into this story. I don't know why. Everything's just, I enjoy the, so-called classic cheese ball, his name Everyman, but I wasn't big on the mask. I wasn't big on the name. Everything just really, I read it and I went, oh, okay,
Well, there could be a very simple explanation, and that's the name of the scripter.
Yes.
And that is J.M. Demethius. When you hear that name, what do you think of, Kev? Are you familiar with J.M. Demethius?
Never heard of him except Kraven's Last Stand, and he's written a lot.
I thought that you'd read every Marvel comic ever published, but maybe not. Okay, so J.M. Demethius, just so you know, he wrote tons of Defenders. He wrote Captain America with Mike Zeck.
Right.
And then he did Justice League International, the funny one. He was the dialogue writer, okay? Let me just say, he also did Moonshadow later on. I don't know if you remember Moonshadow. It was like a Vertigo title.
Yeah, and I have to admit, like, for me, I've read mailings, but for me, for artists and writers, I'm not always great with the name. I just enjoy the story. I'm horrible that way. So.
No, but here's the thing. Obviously, James Demethius got good later on, but I think Jolie and Josh, you can attest to this. We've read some of his Defenders, and they were horrendous. We're talking about the era with Valkyrie and who else was in there? Hellcat? When they go to hell, and it's just drawn by Don Perlin. It's some of the worst stuff we've ever read. Oh, my God.
And it's funny you mention that because that's kind of how I felt. I'm like, this reminds me of some style and some. I was trying to think of which title it was that a run that had this similar thing.
There you go.
And I was like, as soon as you said that, I was thinking, that's
exactly right.
I feel that. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so we all agree the story is substandard, but I gotta say, I don't hate this. Like, compared to most Marvel team-ups, it's a little bit better than average. Right. Like, the villain's not terrible. There's a little bit of subtext. I don't mind that. It's not great, but I don't hate it.
And I think the problem is we're comparing it to other Marvel team-ups where, like, I'm not comparing it to, like, I'm not judging it by itself as a comic book, and I think that's why I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I almost enjoyed it more because it was funny how bad it was. Like, I think that's why I was like, you know what, this one's not bad. I think it's just because I've been tortured for so long with these Marvel team-ups. I'm finally just like, this is kind of funny, sure. Yeah, that's a good one. Sure, this is good.
Yeah, and it's been a while for me for Marvel team-ups, reading them, so it was kind of the first one. And there are ones, I don't think I've read them all just because I was always filling in some holes. And I was excited. I was like, I think I got myself too excited about it. So I'm like, all right, I haven't read this Marvel team-up yet. And then I was like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
It's like if you're getting caned, this is like the least painful lash on your back, right?
That's like a paper cut.
Yeah. Okay, but one thing I gotta say before we go to the next comic.
You just compared it to a flogging, so I'm still in there. That thought.
I just want to ask. I want to talk about the art quick because I am a huge fan of Sal Buscema. He is our pal, Sal, and G.I.Jolie. I want to know what you think of the art on this issue compared to the other Marvel team-ups that you've read.
I didn't hate this art. A lot of really expressive faces. Mm-hmm. A lot of really like cliche superhero poses though, which I mean he's attributed with being part of the like founders of the style, but like other than that, I was really excited by the faces, even though every man's mask is not a face.
Right.
And then I love how they described that he was smirking and smiling underneath it. It's like, oh my God, this guy is ridiculous. When can I marry him? Mm-hmm. Let's see. Yeah. So like aside from like the cliched superhero poses, which he does very well, I think the art's okay. It's good. It didn't take me out of the story, like so many other team-ups have been rendered, so that's a super plus. Yeah.
All right, Joshua Murr-VELL, what did you think of this art?
Yeah, I actually kind of liked it. As goofy as it was, there were some really fun things with Everyman's Mask. Like, I don't know why, but it worked for me, and I think it was because when in that first confrontation with Mr. Fantastic, he grabs that gun, and he has like the flat expression, like the line for a face, and then he's zapping. It like cuts to Mr. Fantastic. He's being zapped. It cuts back to him again. It's that like serious, expressionless face, and then the next panel after that is like Reed in like the like most pain he's ever been in, like complete anguish. His face is in like red and orange and yellow, and there's like explosions coming out of his mind because his like intelligence is being ripped out of him. And just like that juxtaposition, it's kind of weirdly dark. I think maybe by itself it works better than when you're looking at it as a whole. But I like maybe this could work in a different story or with different writing, because it could be creepy. I think it's just a little too goofy. But anyways, the art works. I think it's pretty good.
Right, like I agree with what G.I. Jolie said. There's a lot of cliched poses, a lot of cliche expressions, but that tells the story right, and it makes it fun. And
but cliche for this story works though.
Right,
you know what I mean? If it's gonna be a corny story like this, with like what was the gun called?
The Absorbiscan.
The Absorbiscan. I want my comic book to look like this. If they're gonna be talking about an Absorbiscan, I think it completely works. The cliche poses, they're great.
Mm-hmm. Didn't Calvin and Hobbes have an Absorbiscan? I think.
Probably.
But anyway, yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna say this is not a great comic, but compared to other Marvel team-ups, especially because of Sal Buscema, I do recommend this issue. G.I. Jolie, do you recommend this issue?
Yep, it's one of the best. The pathetic nature of Larry the Everyman will amuse you.
Yep.
Oh god.
Good stuff.
Brown suit.
Joshua Murr-VELL, do you recommend this issue?
If somebody were to ask me, hey, can you recommend me some good comic books? I would not recommend this one. But if somebody said, hey, can you recommend me some good Marvel team-ups? This would be the top on the list.
All right, there you go. Okay. Kev-N, do you recommend this comic? What do you think?
I would say save your 60 cents.
Ooh, harsh criticism from Windsor, Ontario's biggest comic book fan, arguably. But anyway, okay, so now we're gonna jump over to Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man 81. G.I. Jolie, are you prepared to summarize the story for us?
Oh, totally no. I didn't even read this one.
You didn't what?
I didn't read this one. I think you missed that part of the conversation earlier where I was like, I can only talk about 1 and 2. So I will be here in spirit and laughs. I'm here for the laughs. So might have to be someone else.
Laughs. Okay. I wish Kev, do you want to summarize this one? Here, you can take my laptop.
That's okay. You can go ahead.
Okay. So how about this, Josh? You and I will Marvel team up, and we will team up and review this comic. We will summarize it.
Don't ever involve me in Marvel team up ever again. No. I was kidding.
Okay, I'm going to start this summary of Peter Parker, and you can jump in anytime.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
So on the cover, we see Cloak and Dagger, whom we all love because they're so cool. And then we crack it open, and we've got the Punisher here. And this is back in the old days when the Punisher was kind of a bad guy. Right? Like he was kind of basically a Spider-Man villain. Mm-hmm. And so we cut into whatever prison this is, and we see that Boomerang is in prison, and he's right across the way, or the hallway, or whatever it's called, from Frank Castle, the Punisher. And they actually plan an escape together, and the Punisher helps Boomerang break out, and you're like, whoa, this is weird. Punisher's helping Boomerang. And it's funny because a bunch of guards come in, and they cut, and they don't kill the guards. They just beat them up and take off all their clothes, okay? But they leave them with their undershirts and their boxers on. They actually look kind of like the way I dress, like every day. But and so then they get out to the top of the prison, and then this is where we find out, oh, just when we thought Frank Castle was just a villain, no. He did help Boomerang break out, but he's not going to help him get all the way out of the prison. So he tosses him back into the prison guards, and then he escapes on his own. So now Punisher is out of prison. So then we cut over to Peter Parker. We get some good fun stuff with Peter Parker and his landlady, which we all love to see. But there's a little twist here, because this is Peter Parker, and Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man is kind of a darker, realistic comic. we find out that the landlady is actually kicking out drug users out of, like the apartment. And this is not your ordinary, everyday, doobie smoking teenagers. This is like some heavy duty drugs. We see some heroin paraphernalia here. This is back in the 80s when they showed graphic use of drugs, which is they don't do anymore. But anyway, so Peter Parker's like, okay, I got to do something about this. And then we cut over and we see that Cloak and Dagger are also following what's going on. And their main thing is that they are out to get drug users because they were kind of abused and taken advantage of when they were younger or whatever. So they go after these drug users and basically are attacking them. Punisher comes in and, he's going to intervene. And then Peter Parker, he of course has to go visit Black Cat in the hospital.
Yeah.
For the second time this month.
You did miss the part where Dagger shoots the druggies with her daggers, and they are cured, and they no longer crave drugs. They're no longer addicted.
Yeah, she purifies them.
She purifies them by shooting them with daggers.
I wish, if only that worked, right?
Which is something we've never seen her do before. They don't really explain or expand upon that, but...
Can we just say, at that moment, it's safe to say that superhero comics in 1983 were probably not properly equipped to deal with, these types of issues. You know what I mean? Like,
well, because then even right after they're celebrating, they're like, "Finally, we're clean." Like we've been kind of like struggling with this burden all these years, and we're finally free. And then Frank Castle comes in. He says, "Too little, too late, thugs," and he just starts beating them up.
Right.
Like
it's the president of the Philippines coming to save the day here. He's just going to shoot everyone in the face. Yeah, so anyway, Spidey visits Black Cat in the hospital. And then, of course, he has a flashback to the awesome android, because we got to connect these comics together, right? So we know that they're all, one universe, whatever. And then Spider-Man, I'm sorry that I'm laughing at this, but it's just so ridiculous. Spider-Man swings in on this like warehouse, and he finds like 10 to 15 of these druggies that are all... Yeah, they've been beaten to a pulp. Cloak and Dagger are there, and once again, Spider-Man and Cloak and Dagger have a big disagreement because their methods are different or whatever. So they start fighting each other, and Spidey goes into Cloak's cloak, but he's A-okay. And then this is kind of cool because Spider-Man thinks that they did this, but actually, Dagger illuminates the room and shows, no, it wasn't us that did this. It was someone else. Oh no, we see these bullet holes in the wall. And Spidey's like, mercy bullets. But the man who used them didn't show any mercy. He came here to find the source of the drugs. He left to slay that source. And then we cut over to Frank Castle, the Punisher, battle report number 500-89. And so he gives his report to the War Journal, and he's ready to kick some ass. And he's like, I have confirmed what I suspected in prison. The identity of the man behind New York's illegal drug market, the kingpin of crime. Battle report, tonight I will kill the kingpin. And then it says next, the race for the fat man. And that is the end. And let me tell you, if I was, 5 years old in 1983 or whatever, I would have been so pumped for the next issue. Joshua Murr-VELL, what did you think of this issue of Peter Parker?
I think that the writing felt really off to me.
Okay.
Like the dialogue didn't fit the story a lot of the times.
Okay.
And like it kept that kind of like corny writing, but trying to have a serious tone with the story and the events that are going on.
Okay.
So it kind of pushed me out a little bit. I really love Cloak and Dagger. I have loved every single story that they've appeared in with Spider-Man.
Right.
Spectacular. They've been showing up every few issues, I think. Maybe
right.
Well, spread out maybe more than just a few issues.
Yeah,
but,
every few. Yeah.
So I don't know. I thought it was okay. I didn't hate it. Yeah, there was some really good stuff. Again, I don't know what it was. Maybe I think it was just the weird kind of corny writing. Like, why is Spider-Man fighting them again? Like, it feels like Spider-Man forgets their powers every single time he confronts them, and he's got it's the same fight over and over again, just to be like, oh right, we're friends. It's like it's happened every single time they've had that interaction.
That's a good point.
I mean, even like, okay, so one of the corny things that kind of stood out to me was he jumps out of Cloak's cloak,
right?
And he says, you've escaped me. You're the only one who's ever done that.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I don't know, it just, like, it feels a little off reading the dialogue when they're talking about, like, serious drug uses and more of, like, the, like, street-level crime and Kingpin and Frank Castle's coming in and just shooting up the place. And, like, we see multiple times a room full of dead bodies, but it doesn't ever feel like there's any weight there.
Right.
So I think it's just a little bit disjointed, and maybe that's why I didn't enjoy it as much as the other ones. Because the other ones, the writing really fit with the dark tone. The visuals were extremely dark, and the events that were happening matched that.
So, Kev-N, are you familiar with Cloak and Dagger?
Yes, I've heard of them. Of course.
All right.
I'm just kidding. I do.
So this is this is an early appearance. Does this feel off to you, or does this feel like the authentic Cloak and Dagger?
I don't know if there was just enough of them. Like, there wasn't enough there of, like, they're in a couple parts, right? It doesn't seem like there's enough to really say. Yeah, there's a typical, his dark dimension that people go through. And I can't remember. Her things were supposed to be, her light was supposed to be for, like, this to help the soul, I think, if I recall,
kind
on
of.
something
There's
powers.
almost like I don't want to say a religious overtone.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be
bit.
light and dark is
Right.
the whole thing about them. He's supposed to the tone, like, kind of tone for their sins or feeling the dark. Yeah, there is that religious aspect to it. There wasn't enough there to me in terms of the characters. I felt like I overall I didn't mind the story. I mean, because back then I was trying to collect any of the old Punisher appearances.
Sure.
But this is when the Punisher was like this. He was this anti-hero vigilante that would pop in and out and be a nuisance for Spider-Man. And yeah, he was pretty, he had his morals, and if you want to call them morals, but it was basically, if you did you were someone who broke the law or whatever, he would punish you, right? So as that, it was exciting to see that and see him in there and breaking out. But it was just, everything was, I have to agree. Some of it was a little off. I still enjoyed it though, the story. Like, I didn't mind it. There was a lot of, it's a lot of characters I like, so you're kind of like, you're kind of getting to it. But I think, I could see some of the word, some of the descriptions were a little, they didn't fit with that tone that I think they were trying to go with. The dark, the criminal, the more gray than black and white for a typical hero thing. And there was one scene I found funny when he was with Black Cat, and and there's the picture of all the women behind him.
Right.
Do you notice who's also in that picture? And I don't know, he had a relationship with Dagger. I felt that was really weird that she's drawn in with the heads all at the top.
Really?
Yeah, you can see the eye,
really?
like if you go to the scene where it shows you can see her face up there, and I'm kind of
okay.
Like, why are you in this? So I don't know. Is this they're trying to get these characters? They were trying to pump them out and create new characters and see if they can start their title or whatever. But yeah, it was it was off kilter. Something was. I can't grasp exactly what it is, but it just didn't feel like there was enough substance in some of the areas. If that makes sense. I don't know how to describe it.
Well, here's the thing: is the last issue that we read of Peter Parker was one of the best of the whole run. It was the one that was all about J. Jonah Jameson. Do you remember that one narrating?
I do. If I see,
it's a great one.
It's been a while.
So that was probably the best one. So this is obviously kind of a little bit of a return back to normalcy, I guess we'll say. So it's not spectacular. So funny. But it's definitely, I thought it was okay.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
It was exciting to see the Punisher. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of him.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to comment. I was actually surprised how good the art was, considering how bad a reputation Al Milgrom has. G.I. Julie, have you had a chance to look through the art in this issue as we've been talking?
Nope.
Okay. Whee!
I just remember the cover and going, "Oh, I'm so tired of reading, but this is a Cloak and Dagger issue," and I just closed my laptop and went and made sushi instead.
Whee! Okay. So, well, okay. I guess the cover's pretty good, but it's not really indicative of the insides. But
No, I mean I could look at it right now.
yeah, sure. You can look at it as we talk, and then we can come back to you in a few minutes. But Joshua Murr-VELL, what did you think of this art by Al Milgrom and Jim Mooney?
It was pretty good. I think it would have worked if the tone felt darker, because there were definitely some more like darker, serious things happening, but it felt like it didn't always match what was happening in the story.
That's a good point.
Like in particular, I don't know what page this is, but it's when Peter first goes into the building with all of the
not dead bodies, but sick bodies.
Well, the thing is, they're dead bodies, though. Like
they look like dead bodies.
Later on, we see the bullet holes in the wall. Like, did the Punisher shoot them unlethally so they all got knocked out? Like, no, he killed them all, right? And even so the dialogue.
Bullets,
sorry, what was that?
Sorry.
Right, yeah, they like weirdly described it as like non-lethal bullets, right?
Which is kind of like a bullshit editorial
vision
made later. Like they're obviously dead. Yeah.
Okay, this one guy in the foreground here, his mouth is open and his eyes are wide open. Like, there's no way he's just passed out. Like he's dead. Right? Like, it just doesn't... It feels like the tone was supposed to be darker, and it was supposed to be this more serious story, and then later on, they had to tone down how dark it was, and kind of edit themselves to be like, Peter says, looks like these junkies have been beaten to a pulp. And this guy they're all laying there dead. Like,
right.
They're all dead. The one guy in the back is like sprawled out on the wall. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like when you fall down or getting knocked out. Like, he's done. It just, and then later on again with like the weird like half-assed like, oh yeah, they're non-lethal bullets with gas inside to knock them out. Like, I don't.
You know what? I actually saw a really funny tweet this week, and it was something like, "We have to get over this idea in fiction that a hero can just hit a bad guy over the head and knock him out, and then he'll be fine and wake up like a half hour later. Like, that doesn't quite happen in real life." And this whole idea that Spider-Man comes into this room and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys laying there clearly dead, and he's like, looks like these junkies have been beaten to a pulp. Like, did you check their pulse? You know what I mean? Like, they're probably all dead. They're all corpses.
And I'm wondering if the Comics Code Authority got to it as well, because it seems like an aftermath. And I think there just seems like some sloppy editing at the end with that, and that's a good point. And I forgot about that one too. I was looking at that last few pages and panels and going, they're dead. They don't look knocked out. And I think the same thing with showing Dagger in the just people didn't catch things. Like, I think when they're drawing it, when he's thinking of the girls in his life, why is Dagger there? There's just there's some sloppy things that just didn't get checked over again, I think. And I wonder if something on the editorial side of it said, no, we can't do that, and then they just patched it up as fast as they could.
Right, could have been.
But then they forgot to patch up the bullet holes in the
right,
and the open eyes
and panel. Yeah.
Well, so I just want to jump to the art for a minute. So if you guys go to digital page 18, I think this big splash page with Cloak and Dagger and Spidey is actually really good. That's a good shot. And then the next page is great. The next few pages are really
I didn't mind the art overall. I think there was some really nice panels to it, and and some, flow. I mean, and I find that with a lot, even some of the not so great artists in terms of detail. I mean, that was that whole Marvel way, and how you did things, the dramaticness of it and the flow. And they really did have to tell the story first visually before you could even narrate it, that type of thing. So I could follow, and I always say that, I've talked about this before, if I can open it up without words and then read or scan each panel and I can make sense of the story, then to me that's good visual storytelling for a comic book. And I think I see that with all three of them. I didn't mind any overall the artwork. I always found it was easy to follow for most part. Obviously there's a few panels you kind of question or things that maybe didn't get caught properly, but overall I liked some of the artwork in it for sure.
G.I. Jolie, did you get a chance to scan through this issue?
Oh, I sure did.
Woo! What do you think?
Okay. It's good. I like it. But again, like Kev was saying, there's discrepancies. Like there always are going to be one or two panels that are kind of strange. But what I wanted to kind of make, what I sort of have an issue with is that the only black man in this comic is as faceless as the everyman.
Yeah.
You're right.
Which is really unnerving and annoying because Dagger is gorgeous. And she's like, there's enough detail there that we know that a monocle is part of her costume. But like, we get nothing for the only, for the other cool character, the only black character other than a criminal thug, drug addict
user, right?
Drug
user in the
agree.
comic. So, aside from the very distracting fact that every time you see Cloak and Dagger, they kind of are very Las Vegas illusionist magician posy. They're really cool. They're really well done, but I have to point it out because it has to be pointed out. You didn't want to put character into Cloak. Come on.
Right.
He's one of the good guys. That's terrifying.
The first thing that Spider-Man says actually to Cloak is, "You're holding her hostage, aren't you?" He jumps in and is like, "Leave her alone. You're forcing her to do this, aren't you? You bad guy." It's just
right.
It just it felt off reading it as well.
Yeah, so this should never be republished ever. And I see that we're reading a copy that hasn't been recolored, so thank God for that. Maybe it has been reprinted, but who knows, whatever. That's even more troubling because I haven't read the text that you bring that up, and it's troubling and problematic, and I don't even know what to say.
I don't know though. I actually think this is, especially compared to Marvel Team Up, this is a fairly good comic, and even if there's issues with it, as far as Bill Mantlo trying to incorporate a black character into the story, and he doesn't quite hit the mark, I still think it's a good attempt though. I still think this is a good comic.
It's a good comic, but it should still be called out for its not so thinly veiled racism.
Yeah, it's definitely there, unfortunately. Well, yeah,
we can say that it stood in what was this, the 80s? So there's definitely the war on drugs happening, but if we're going to talk about this comic, we have to talk about the fact that Spider-Man questions Cloak's motives.
Right.
That is just something that has to happen in this dialogue, and it would be irresponsible for the Comic Book Syndicate / the Spider Cast not to address it because it's disgusting. But anyway, back to the art on a lighter note. I agree with Josh. If the coloring was darker, it would have set a moodier tone. The coloring is not the best, so yeah.
I completely agree with you about definitely calling attention to it. It's definitely important to note, especially going back and reading it. It's definitely a comic of its time. Overall, it might be a good story, but it's definitely important to point out. Going off of what you were saying with the art, and talking about how having a more darker tone, like, it feels like that's what they wanted to do. The original appearance of Cloak and Dagger was back, I think, like a year before this. In '82, like that, I think, was their first appearance. And I think that issue of Spectacular might be my favorite one that we've read on the podcast so far. That first appearance is very good. It was, really, I think, number 64. I remember because I went back and reread it because I liked it so much.
Oh, really?
The art was very dark. The story was intense. We don't really know for sure the motives. We're kind of left in the dark with Peter Parker when they're introduced. Even by the end, we see Cloak and Dagger like going up against these thugs that drugged them and tortured them and kind of gave them their powers. And by the end of it, I think that they do end up killing the people that held them hostage, and then they disappear, and Peter Parker's just left there in the dark, and he's kind of like, it's kind of almost like a cliffhanger, but more on like Peter's side, where he doesn't really know what to do next, and that story doesn't continue until like issues later. It just has so much more weight and depth to it, and they've done it before in Spectacular. I think that they were trying to do that again, and then maybe the editors kind of came in and were like, well, maybe it's a little too dark. We want to bring this, have it a little bit more light and fluffy, because Spectacular back then was, I feel like, the darker of the three comics. Amazing definitely felt more classic. Marvel Team Up was their pop fun, popcorn comic book to get everybody interested in reading all the other heroes. And then Spectacular was the more dark, gritty side of things. And more recently, Amazing has kind of taken on the role of that like street level mafia story. And Spectacular's been kind of light and fluffy. And I feel like because Cloak and Dagger's story is continuing in Spectacular, they've had to kind of re-evaluate how they're telling that story and make it more on that like light fluffy side. And I think that maybe that's why the story suffers so much.
Could be. I mean, we should point out that the first appearance of Cloak and Dagger that you read was also written by Bill Mantlo, and he's also written this one, so maybe he's just sort of running out of ideas at this point. I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, but I'm excited that he's brought Punisher into this, just because I'm not a fan of 90s Punisher, but I'm definitely a fan of 80s Punisher. I want to see where the story goes. So here's the thing. I will definitely recommend this issue just because I'm a big fan of this era of Spectacular. Joshua Murr-VELL, would you recommend this issue?
I think I would. I think for the most part it does work. I just think that there are some downfalls with it, and I don't think it's as like fleshed out as it could be.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Kev-N, are you going to spend 60 cents on this comic?
Yeah, I would, because again, just a fan of those characters and who's in it, but also, I think it's just it starts that whole era of the Cloak and Dagger and Punisher. So to really get a context of the characters and how they developed and worked, I would recommend it for people to read, for sure.
I just want to point out that in Canada it was 75 cents.
Good point. And the UK it was 25 pence.
It's 75. Okay, then I wouldn't. Yeah, this one I would spend 3/4. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Or 25p in the UK.
Right. So there you go. We had a little sampling of Spidey from 1983. Kev-N, I'd like to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Again, Kev-N has read pretty much every Marvel comic from 61 to 91, I think.
Up to about 2000, most of it. Yeah.
Wow. Whew.
I have to go back again.
Impressed. I know. I'm impressed. I'd like to thank G.I.JOLIE for coming back, and hopefully you'll be with us again next week.
You're welcome. Hopefully I will be.
Awesome.
I noticed there's no Amazing on the list of reads, so I'm a little miffed.
Uh-oh.
Well, next week's going to be a little bit different, but we'll keep it as a surprise. And as always, I want to thank Joshua Murr-VELL for being the co-host. And Josh, you can take it from here.
Yeah, we also want to thank you guys for listening. If you like the podcast, it really helps when you leave a review over on Apple Podcasts, or you can drop us a comment or tweet. You can reach us over at HCT Spidercast or at Comic Syndicate on Twitter, or you can find us at the Comic Book Syndicate pretty much anywhere else. We want to keep this conversation going, so yeah, please keep in touch.
Woo! All right, so until next Monday, this has been Here Comes the Spidercast.
All right, see you then.